a much smaller space of the only two women in the play. And so on. I could, continue, obviously, to sort of pull out smaller character spaces from these larger character system. But first, let me address a general question. Why use space to think about plot in the first place? I mean, what do we gain by doing that? For me, basically two things. That here, every part of the plot is explicitly linked to all the others, and nothing ever disappears. Whether a character is present on stage or not at any given moment, it is never not there in the network. Once the ghost shows up at Elsinore, Hamlet's life and everybody else's changes forever, whether the ghost continues to be present on stage, to appear or not. Here, what is done is never undone, cannot be undone, in a sense. Once the network splits between Hamlet and Claudius, all characters who are connected to both, with the exception of Osric and Horatio, whose only connection to Claudius, however, is a single sentence, all the other characters die, all the other characters who belong to this conjunction, they're killed whether Hamlet or Claudius are near them or not. Polonius and Laertes, of course, are killed by Hamlet and Gertrude by Claudius, but Ophelia, Rosencrantz, and Guildenstern die when neither Hamlet nor Horatio are near. Killed because they did make love to their employment, as Hamlet has it, or killed by their position in the network. Because, see, this network is clearly not Hamlet, right? I don't think I have to convince you of that. It's not Hamlet, it's a model of Hamlet. And like all models, it is the result of a process of reduction and abstraction that makes it quite obviously a lot less than the original text, a skeleton to a living body, in a sense. The point is, the model can also be more than the original Hamlet in that it makes us see some of the play's structures so much more clearly. Like, for instance, this correlation of death with a specific region of the network. Look at it. You're out of that space. You're safe. No one dies outside of the double connection to Hamlet and Claudius. Or take the question of the protagonist. There is another application of there are very few applications of network. I only found 2 applications of network theory to literature in a large sense. The Shakespeare study, and the other one is actually, it's applied to the Marvel universe. And it has a very interesting redefinition of the protagonist. The protagonist for them is the character that minimizes the sum of distances to all other vertices. And I think implicitly we do that when we think about the protagonist. One measures the distances between characters, makes the average, and finds who is closest to the network as a whole. In other words, the protagonist is redefined as the center of the network. In their case, it was Captain America at an average distance of 1.7 from other characters. In our case, it's Hamlet at actually a smaller average distance of 1.45. It's 1 degree of separation between him and these 16 characters and 2 degrees with the other characters in the play. See, a model makes us see structures, and it's not just a matter of seeing. The point is, you can intervene on a model, make experiments. Think of the protagonist again. For us literary critics, when we think about a protagonist, the protagonist is there because it's important because it's a very rich part of the text. We could speak for hours on the protagonist of a play or of a novel, right? It's full of meaning. We would never dream of doing without the protagonist, of thinking about a text without the protagonist. But actually, network theory does exactly that. The protagonist can be interesting in its conceptual way of dealing with networks because it would take the Hamlet network and remove Hamlet to see what happens to the network as such. And what happens is, as you can see, that the network almost splits in half. And between the space of the court on the right and the space of the Ghost and Fortinbras and others on the left, all that is left are those 3 edges between Horatio, Osric, the Queen, and Claudius, which is to say 36 words in all. And if we use the first quarter of the play, the notorious bad quarter, of which this would be the full network, the breakdown would be even more, a single edge would remain once you remove Hamlet from the play. So why is the protagonist significant in a network theory approach? Not in itself, but because it allows you to test, to experiment with the solidity or resilience, as is often called, of the network. And that varies from case to case. Take Othello and remove Othello. Lear and remove Lear. Macbeth and remove Macbeth. As you can see, all of the networks are weakened, obviously. None of them in the same way as the Hamlet network. And Macbeth is probably the best case. I'm going back to the full network here. Removing Macbeth has a very strong effect on a group of characters down at the bottom, as you will see, but not really that much on the general structure of the play. Macbeth, we could say, has its own periphery of characters, those down there, but it does not act as a hinge or a hub in the structure of the network in the way Hamlet does. What most resembles this last slide here is not so much Hamlet as the second most central character in Hamlet, that is to say Claudius. And actually, in purely quantitative terms, Claudius is almost exactly as central as Hamlet. It's at an average distance of 1.52 versus 145, so it's virtually the same. In structural terms, it's a completely different story. When we remove Claudius from the network, this is a full network. This is a full network without Claudius. As you can see again, a group of characters on the top right are affected, but hardly the structure as a whole. And even if we remove first Hamlet and then Claudius, the removal of Claudius doesn't really add that or subtract that much to what removing Hamlet had already done to the play. On the other hand, if we remove Hamlet and then the third most central character in the play, which is Horatio, perhaps surprisingly, but it's clearly Horatio. I mean, you can measure it, so it is Horatio. If we remove Hamlet, it's a fact. If we remove Hamlet and Horatio, then not only do we have radical fragmentation, as you can see, but what happens is that the Ghost and Fortinbras, that is to say the beginning and the ending of the play, are completely separated from the main body of the plot. And to have the same result with the other tragedies, we would have to remove 7 or 8 characters. Here, only 2. The hubs are so important, removing just 2 is enough to, in a sense, destroy the solidity of the network. Why do we make models? To make experiments. Why do we make experiments? To find some truths and some more problems. Here, 3. Why is the Hamlet network so much more dependent on the protagonist than the other tragedies? Why is the removal of Claudius so insignificant? Why is Horatio so important? Why is Hamlet the play so dependent on Hamlet the prince? Probably because of how sovereignty appears in the play. All of the tragedies seem to function in a similar way. They all begin with a figure of legitimacy and then followed by an usurpation of sorts, and then by a second figure of legitimacy. But in Macbeth, the figures of legitimacy are in red and purple. In Macbeth and in Lear, the 2 fields of legitimacy and